Well, chaps, we're carrying on. Oh, that's not my favourite one. It's the trouble with these little balls. Very quick, as I mentioned in the previous video about Her Majesty the Queen, I've got some of these reproduction newspapers, and I'll just mention briefly. I laugh. Oh, I laugh. Right then. For some reason, in the middle of one about the Falklands, this is the Daily Mirror's reproduction. I'll hold it as close as I can. For the day after Margaret Thatcher narrowly survived death in Brighton in October 1984. It says murder, and for some reason the picture they chose of Mrs. Thatcher is when she blinked. I laughed, as you know, with all the photos. And it says a devastated building, a wounded policeman, and a grieving Prime Minister. 3 images of an outrage that shocked the nation yesterday. IRA bomb, which went off without warning, wrecked Brighton's Grand Hotel, where leading Tories were staying for their conference. The explosion killed 2 people and injured 30. 2 others were still missing last night. Mrs. Thatcher escaped unhurt but looked shaken as she stood, eyes closed, for 2 minutes silence at the conference, and during the debate on Northern Ireland she seemed close to tears. The professional IRA admitted responsibility for the bombing. They said they wanted to wipe out the British cabinet and added, "Today we were unlucky, but you will always have to be lucky, always." My grandmother did not particularly care for Mrs. T. She was from Barnard Castle, County Durham. Not a lot of people I know care for Mrs. Thatcher, but it was a fairly, I was born just under a year later, September 1985, so 11 months later, and if Mrs. Thatcher had been killed, this would have been a history-changing moment. Where, as I say, whatever you think of the lady, and I'm not really here to spark a political debate one way or the other, it would have been our John F. Kennedy assassination, in the sense that, you know, Mrs. Thatcher by 1984 had been in power 5 years. She had not long been into her second term. And who, you know, in America, if the president is killed, you get the vice president. And in an extreme circumstance, if the president and vice president is killed, you get the Speaker of the House and then the Secretary of State. So there's, you know, there is a structure to the loss of a leader. Now, as far as I know, in this country, it must go to the Deputy Prime Minister. But in this country, Deputy Prime Minister is as useless a title of office than Postmaster General might be in the United States. All due respect, of course. It could have changed things. Mrs. Thatcher was fairly hard as far as the IRA went, but she said a few, you know, many times, almost like John F. Kennedy did before he died in Dallas, that, you know, she was half expecting to be killed. You know, the IRA made no secret before 1984, from when she took office in 1979, that if they could, they would kill her. And so, the longer she was in office, the more it built in her mind that she could be killed by the IRA or some other branch of terrorism. But otherwise, I find reproduction newspapers fascinating. And I'll show you this one briefly. I know I'm filming in black and white. It's a Daily Mirror. Almost the start of the war, really. When it says here, Britain takes South Georgia, helicopters hit Argentine sub, Thatcher talks with the Queen, and then in large words, it's war, says Argentina. I won't read all of it, but South Georgia is almost the, well, was technically the start of what became the Falklands conflict. South Georgia in itself is unpopulated, not permanently anyway, and if it is, it's by the British Antarctic Survey. And in 1982, a few Argentines were landed there by ship. They claimed they were scrap metal workers or some such, and claimed South Georgia and the Sandwich Islands in the name of Argentina. And that was kind of like the first, ooh, hello, trouble. And then, of course, they took the Falklands, and the rest is history. Now, this is the Daily Mirror. Now, for a start, this is 14 pence in 1982 currency, so you're like, cheap, even for that pile of, you know. The Times did I've got a few reproductions, the moon landing, JFK, the abdication. Victory in the Falklands, June 15th. And this is one of the most famous photos, excuse me, of the 20th century as far as Britain's concerned. British troops marching, or men of 45 Commando, marched down from Two Sisters towards Port Stanley. They wear berets rather than helmets, a sure indication that their enemy has surrendered. Argentines will have to leave islands unarmed. How 6,000 troops routed 11,000 Argentines. But the beauty of it is, apart from this is a 21st century. You've got, you know, they've got pictures of the conscripts that were captured. Let's have a look. This one is brilliant. Look at that. This advert here in the corner. Fly Manhattan free with TWA. Stansted flights on eve of suffering. They've put the words against the bloody head. Fly to New York by TWA first class or ambassador class, and you can take our helicopter surface or own terminal at JFK Airport to the East 34th Street heliport in Midtown Manhattan. It will save you a lot of time. It's only about 8 minutes flying time. It will save you a lot of money, up to $30 cab fare on your return trip. If you can check in at East 34th Street, if you haven't already reserved your seat and collected your boarding cards, you can do it there and roll off to JFK. Free again. Think of the time and money you'll save flying to New York TWA. It's just another service from the airline that offers so much. TWA. See your TWA main agent for details. You're going to like us. TWA. I wish I could go into this. I wish I could go into this in more detail. The Falklands was the last gasp of what was once a great country. And I'm not being that in a flag waving sense of the word, but even the Iraq War did not see, and the Gulf War in 1991 did not see the mobilisation of the Navy, certainly, that the Falklands did. Indeed, our recent deployment of HMS Queen Elizabeth and her Command Strike Group from Portsmouth 2 weeks ago now is the biggest mobilisation of naval forces this country has summoned since the Falklands. The thing is, we've had much more time to prepare for it. The Falklands, from the word go, 3 days. 3 days. It's a so amateurish a production that makes the War of the Worlds in 1939 look fairly serious. So that's the replicas of the Falklands, and as I was saying, really the last time this country did something meaningful. The naval brass, like you see in the film The Iron Lady, turned up at number 10 Downing Street in full dress because they had been at some kind of function. And Mrs. Thatcher said something like, you know, I want to go after these islands, I want to get them back, they're British people. You know, and they said, well, you know, it's going to be a tough order, Madam Prime Minister. The Navy has been stripped back. We've got one aircraft carrier, technically, HMS Invincible. She's in the process of being sold to the Australians. It's going to take, you know, it will take time to get things ready. She went, well, why has the Navy been cut, has been cut back? And they went, well, you know, your government has done naval cuts last year or whatever. Oh, okay. Well, how long will it take to send a fleet to the Falklands? Well, Madam Prime Minister, 3 weeks. And Mrs. Thatcher apparently was quite surprised. 3 weeks to send this fleet to the Falklands? And they apparently had to explain to her that basically the Falkland Islands are 8,000 miles away from the United Kingdom. And that's the thing, I can't imagine that more than a few people in 1982 would have known or realised that the Falkland Islands were that far away, or indeed that we even owned the Falkland Islands. And the absolute historical irony of things is that the British people, Britain of the time, spent 2 months heading there, liberating the islands and making sure all was safe. And they had to hurry because in the South Atlantic, the weather is slightly different at that time of year than it is up here. I mean, like I say, I'm sweltering in 23, 25 degrees in June 19 in the 80s, and certainly now. I mean, Falkland Islands posted a picture on Facebook today, and they've got several inches of snow, for God's sake. So they had to hurry before the weather turned, and the ships of the fleet were suffering. The Royal Navy had not seen this kind of stress upon its ships since probably the Korean War in the early 50s, and certainly not since the Second World War. So almost like Germany in 1940, when, you know, they had already rolled up Poland, they rolled up the Scandinavian countries, France and the Low Countries, the Channel Islands, and were on the verge of invading Britain. Britain, in some respects, in 1982, had no reason, no allowance for liberating the Falkland Islands. The fleet was ready in 3 days. God knows how it was from what I've read. Was it the last gasp of a colonial power? I think personally it's not as black and white as some people make out. When Maradona died, everyone said we should just give the Falklands back to the Argentines. Not so simple. They're British. They were British from when Spain ran Argentina, when there was no Argentina. It wasn't Britain trying to expand or forcibly keep people that were under the British flag who did not want to be British. Like, say, if we had gone into Kenya in the 60s or something. The Falkland Islanders wanted to be British. They still want to be British, and in some respects they're more British than we are here in the mainland. I'm old-fashioned enough to think that if there were a group of people who want to remain attached to a certain group of people, a certain flag, and they are taken forcibly against their will, against their opinion, by another power, be it Argentina or any other country, you have a duty here in the so-called mother country to step in and free them. We do it, and everyone says it's the British Empire trying to come back, it's colonialism, it's all the rest of it. Any other country does it. Russia going into Georgia in whatever year it was now, over 10 years, 2008 or whatever. Russia going into Ukraine. China forcibly standing down upon Hong Kong and wanting to go after Taiwan. You know, like Mrs. Thatcher points out in the film played by Meryl Streep, who won her Academy Award for it, when the American, Sid Haig seems rather dismissive of her plans to go after the islands. She said, would you not do the same if Hawaii was taken? Hawaii, is not next door to the United States. We sent a ship to the Channel Islands a couple of weeks ago because the French were threatening to close down the electricity, and fishermen were going to blockade St. Helier port, and that's the German occupation of the Channel Islands showed in the war. That port, any port into the Channel Islands, is still incredibly important to the lifeblood of the islands. The Channel Islands technically suffered a famine from of the winter of 1944-45. Everyone's going, Boris is doing this to get votes, Boris is doing this. Well, we weren't going to go to war with France, we weren't going to blow those fishing boats out of the water. But what if we, British fishermen and that are threatened to do the same to one of the French overseas territories in South America or wherever? the other week, the Spanish sent a few thousand troops to their enclaves in North Africa. You know, this is the thing, people bang on about Gibraltar, but forget that the Spanish have their own version of Gibraltar in North Africa, and I forget the names of them, but, you know, everyone's going, oh, well, you know, if we did that to Gibraltar, uproar. You defend your people. You act for your people. I'd expect the same with Boris Johnson as I would if Jeremy Corbyn was in power, or Tony Blair back in the day, although I wouldn't have trusted Tony Blair to do it. What started as something about replica newspapers has developed into its own, but I'm not looking for argument, I'm not looking for a disagreement, although I'm usually open for those kind of things on YouTube. But all because, you know, next year is the 40th anniversary of the Falkland conflict, and there will be a lot of stuff, I guarantee you, in the newspapers and on the internet. Many young men, my age now, lost their lives in the South Atlantic in 1982. Almost 400. And I like to think they did not die in vain. They probably wondered what the bloody hell they were doing 8,000 miles away from home, closer to the South Pole than London. But you join, you know, as the old joke goes in the armed forces, don't join up if you can't take a joke. That's not to say they're decile joke, it's just an old saying. The late Admiral Sir Sandy Woodard, who commanded the Navy and indeed the task force in 1982, said a few years before he died, because he died about 5 years ago now, if the French occupied the Isle of Wight, we would not have the capability to liberate it or even reach the far side of the channel. So if the Argentines marched into Port Stanley tomorrow, who knows? But there were almost 3,000, 6,000 more personnel in the Falklands now than there were in 1982. So join me next year if I'm still ticking along for the Falkland War at 40. Thank you.